And welcome everyone to Grief, Burnout, and the Workplace. This is a topic that Dave and I have been talking about for quite a while. And as a matter of fact, some of you may have heard him on a radio show last Monday. But we have been having conversations around the financial aspects of grief in the workplace. So we decided to do this webinar to see to talk about all the aspects of it and to share with you some of our insights. So first of all, we will introduce ourselves to you. If you don't know me, I'm Nancy Loeffler. I'm the founder of Being with Grief and the author of The Alchemy of Grief, Your Journey to Wholeness. And one of the things I do is to teach my clients the skills to feel their feelings better or more fully so that they can find joy again after a loss, and also live a life of meaning and purpose. And I came to this work after going through the grief journey of my daughter's death. My daughter Leah died, over 22 years ago from injuries she sustained in a car accident when she was 17. So I've been on this journey for quite a while, and it's my passion to help others, to show them what's possible, that it is possible to come through to the other side and live a meaningful life. And now, Dave, why don't you introduce yourself?
Thank you, Nancy. Hi, everyone. My name is Dave Baldwin, the founder of Baldwin Systems, and my focus, the way I work with businesses, is helping them find the money, the time, the resources, and the opportunities to move forward in their businesses by embracing a systematic approach. My background started out in technology. I also worked as a marketing copywriter for about 10 years, and most recently, in the last few years, I've done a lot with finance. And looking at those different areas of a business has helped me to realize how easy it is to get into silos and think from a tunnel vision standpoint and only look at one area of a business.
Mm-hmm.
And so I look forward to today kind of looking at systems from a different angle and looking at the empathy and the compassion side of a business, because that is something that can be grossly missing in a lot of businesses. And I think so I was really looking forward to sharing some perspectives with Nancy on that.
Yeah, and I want to start out with a statistic that every time I read it or hear it, it still continues to astound me because it's a big number. The impact of unrecognized grief in the workplace exceeds $16 billion a year. And that is from the Grief Recovery Institute. And they looked at three basic areas. They looked at inability to concentrate, poor decision-making, which can be caused by inability to concentrate, and safety, which can also be caused by both of the first two reasons. And that's a big number. And when you consider that that's a number that companies, they always want to maximize profits and eliminate losses. And they're missing this big piece here, because if it's unrecognized, how do they know it's there? So one of the things I like to talk about is, how do we recognize grief? What are some of the signposts? Or I think you at one point, Dave, called it, what are some of the disguises that grief wears? I think that's a
think burnout is one of those things that I think it actually has disguises of its own. But I think that just because of the fact that in the workplace you're supposed to be professional, and you've got all these different constraints that we're under, that we have a lot of, I guess, pressure, social pressure, and sometimes financial pressure to mask emotions and not necessarily reveal what's going on for a variety of different reasons. So I think that's one of the many ways that these disguises show up, because you can't just show up at work and cry in the middle of a meeting, or just necessarily share too much about what's going on in your personal life. So
right. And grief can show up in a number of different ways, well, in your life, but at a business specifically, you could a coworker could die, or a coworker could have a family member that die, or a coworker could be going through another kind of a loss, like a divorce or health issues, or issues with the family, their children are having issues, or you just could be in a position at work that, I know you like to talk about this, Dave, the burnout aspect of it, where you're just not in it, your job is not serving your soul, serving your higher purpose, and you feel you need to stay there for all the reasons, the paying bills, taking care of your family, etc. And not being able to share that with anyone at work can be even a bigger stressor.
Well, and I think it's also important to acknowledge the difference between what I think most people might think of as grief in the most common scenarios, either the death of a family member or some kind of an obvious traumatic event. But then there's also low-level grief, which doesn't necessarily get highlight reels and doesn't necessarily get much sympathy from people because it flies under the radar. And I think it could just be as simple as, minor things, or that would seem minor to most people, like I'm going to work and it's not this was my dream job and it's not anymore, or this we used to have a great team and now we don't, or whatever that is. Or it could be personal things. It could be a parent could have had their oldest child start to fill out college applications and then begun to realize, I'm going to be an empty nester soon. And so it doesn't even necessarily mean that it had to have happened yet. It could be anticipatory grief.
Right.
So there's so many different shades of gray here that, but I think the insidious thing about low level grief is that not only do other people not notice it, but I might be inclined to think I should be able to just suck it up and deal with this because it's not that big of a deal. And
It's
if I even think about it at all.
Yeah, it's kind of like low level stress. Now if we look at our lives, I know there's been times when I lived in constant low level stress, and that not only does it affect our jobs, it can affect our health, can affect our relationships, and it tends to snowball when we don't recognize it, so that we can start to meet the feelings of grief. And at least the places that I was working in a corporate setting when Leah died, and I didn't have a roadmap. I didn't know exactly what to do. I knew I didn't feel like working past a certain time. I couldn't concentrate. But the people on the job site that I was working at were understanding, but there wasn't any help for me there.
Yeah, that's and I think that speaks to one of the other factors that I was thinking about in preparation for this today, was that there's the way people respond to grief in a healthy workplace versus what happens when the workplace is to some degree unhealthy. And I think if you've got a healthy team and everybody is supportive, you could show up at work and share that you've got something going on personally, and people will try to support you around that. Now, I think the unfortunate reality in a lot of workplaces is that type of support is not there, because people are watching their backs, and they're also thinking about the fact that they've got stuff going on in their personal lives. They've got too much on their plate, and you kind of meet with a lot of this indifference or just a lack of empathy in a lot of workplaces that I've personally observed. And so the question that I think is a really important one to address is twofold. Is one, if you work at that kind of job and you can't leave, and that's the kind of workplace, or at least you can't leave immediately, how do you manage? How do you cope with that? And the other piece is, suppose it's one of the shades of gray, and maybe it's not, because it's definitely a spectrum. It's not a black and white proposition. It's not either a perfectly healthy workplace or a horrifically unhealthy. But what do you want? What if you're having some kind of a desire to elevate the level of support and empathy and self-awareness in your collective team in your workplace? And I think those are both worth looking at. And I thought, Nancy, you might have some perspective on either of those questions.
And yeah, and Say the questions again.
So the first one is, if you're working in an unhealthy environment where you don't have that kind of support and empathy, how do
Right.
you cope with that? The second piece is, if you want to elevate the level of empathy in your work environment, how do you go about that?
Yeah. Well, the first thing to do is to take care of yourself. Self-care is really important. But what does it mean to attend to self-care in a work environment that isn't healthy? And a lot of times everybody is holding their cards so close to the vest because they're afraid of whatever they're afraid of getting demoted, of not getting a raise, of getting stuck with all the work that they don't want to do, or whatever it is. So learning how to take care of yourself so that you have clear boundaries is one way of protecting yourself in the environment that is not healthy. And maybe there's one person that you can talk to, and that's not always easy to, if you don't know of a person, if you don't have a friend, that may not be easy to discover. But maybe there's ways that you can test that out. And then another thing is to establish healthy routines to help you to get the support that you need. The company that I worked in didn't have a separate HR department, so we didn't have that kind of a resource. But if you do, go to the HR department and find out if they have things for mental health resources, or things like that. Some companies do have resources for mindfulness days, or I even went to a company and did some meditation training for them. So they had at least knowledge that there is another possibility.
I think it's also important to acknowledge from the standpoint of taking care of yourself, that you've got to know, be aware of your surroundings and in your environment, and be aware of how much you feel like you can trust each person. I
Right.
think in general, if I mean, I'm an advocate for talking to disinterested parties when it comes to processing anything emotional, and that could be people who don't work at the company where you are. It could be, and I think not family members, because they're interested in your life in a different way, but it could be just friends that are not entangled in the situation. I'm not going to say that I'll never talk to an interested party, but I'm fine. My general approach has become that if I'm talking to a coworker or somebody that I'm involved transactionally with, I'm going to be very slow to talk to that person about anything involving the situation with both of us, unless I have a very high level of trust with that person. And I think that that's one of the things that can be potentially dangerous in a workplace environment, is you just don't know. If you don't know who you can trust, you're probably going to be tight-lipped about sharing anything with the people that you work with. And so if that's the situation, I think in my mind, the number one priority for self-care has got to be find a disinterested person who understands what you're going through, to talk to outside of the workplace, and who can provide some outside perspective. Because I know that's definitely been probably my most important lifeline that I've had during difficult situations where I just didn't know how to think clearly enough to look at my own situation.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, for knowing how to take care of yourself in that kind of a situation. And I think another point is knowing when the right time to walk away from that job is. Don't overstay because of sometimes the reason that we stay too long in a job is because we're afraid we're not going to get another one. Well, we're not going to get another one if we stay in that job and stress, live in that constant stress. It's not going to happen for a lot of different reasons. We're not putting out that message. We're not allowing ourselves to have a mindset that there is something else out there, that there are other possibilities for us. So I think talking to a trusted outside source who isn't entangled in the day-to-day stuff that you are when you're in your stressed out job is a really great idea. Touching back one more time on someone who is grieving the death of a loved one or the loss of a relationship or something else, some other life-changing transition that it is maybe affecting their work. And if a company would provide outside resources to help their employees when they are grieving that kind of a loss, would help them to become more efficient employees faster. And so it would ultimately help the company. And there are so many people that just don't want to talk about grief, no matter because we don't like talking about grief. That's why it goes unrecognized for so long. We can say we're angry, like some of the masks, you're burnt out, or you're and in terms of being burnt out, when we were preparing for this webinar, one of the things Dave and I talked about were how many times do you go on vacation and your boss tells you don't turn your phone off, and you're expected to be on call even when you're on vacation, which means you're not really taking your vacation. So taking a stand for yourself and saying, I'm going on vacation, this is my time, I'm not going to turn my phone on, or I will check it once a day if there's some dire need. But turn your phone off. Another thing is leaving at a certain hour. You know, I would walk out of my office at 5:30 after having already worked 10 or 11 hours and get looks from people who are going to be there for 2 or 3 more hours, like I was shirking my responsibilities. So know when it's time to leave, whether it's the job at the end of the day or the job.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of social pressure, and also I think the pressure to be on the clock, and to have no boundaries between work and home, or just the example that you said, hey, everybody else is staying late. Doesn't matter that your job description says you leave at 5 o'clock, where we're all putting in the extra effort and you're expected to also. And that, I think it's an example of how, in some cases, to your point, you may just, the only solution might be to just find another job somewhere else. But I think that there's something to look at both on an individual level and in a collective level. If you look at it from a standpoint of grief, is you've got the financial piece, you've got the logistical piece, but you've also got just the purely emotional piece. And I think one of the masks that grief can wear, especially if you have somebody who goes a long time without any way to process grief or handle emotion, they start showing up as a nasty person. And so that could be one of the disguise, at least what I've seen, is it can show up as passive aggressive behavior, or it can look as just outright aggressive behavior, especially if they're a boss or in a position of authority. And you basically have, and I don't mean this in a disparaging way, but more of in a factual way, you have an emotionally incompetent person, because they're not competent in knowing the proper way to handle different emotion.
Right.
So the default response is to basically just become aggressive and lash out at people, and to the point where that becomes like a skin that you wear, or like it appears to be your personality. So I always think any workplace where you just have the nasty coworker, there's probably more to that story that's going on, but the real question is, how do you actually interact with that? So
right. Yeah, that's the difficult thing, because we have to be ready to change ourselves. We're not ready until you're ready. So how do you interact with someone who is stuck in a place that you can see isn't serving them, but is also adversely affecting the workplace and maybe the team that they're working with, or whatever, maybe even the clients. So that's a tricky one, and I don't know that I have the right answer for that, but awareness is the first thing to, when you're aware of it, then you can maybe start to bring some light to it.
Yeah, and I don't think there is a universal answer. I mean, I
Yeah.
think all of it depends on the situation. But yeah,
Mhm.
I mean, I agree that the first thing we do is, well, there's awareness. And then I also think in terms of recognition, specifically, if I can recognize the pattern that's going on, the more quickly I can recognize the different patterns, then the more likely I am to be able to have to, well, first of all, recognize if there's anything I can do about it or not.
Mhm.
But we
Yeah.
also have to think about not just authority, but also power in the situation, from the standpoint of, if I want to make a positive difference in this workplace, do I have the power to do so? Yeah,
Mm.
because
Mhm.
sometimes you don't, but so, and
Right.
sometimes you do, but only to a limited extent. Or sometimes it might be, I have enough power to make a positive difference for one other person, but that's about as far as my power extends.
Mhm.
And even if you're the CEO, that doesn't necessarily mean you have the power to change everything. It's, you know, I think everybody has some degree of power, but if we think about power from the standpoint of how do we create a more compassionate workplace, I think there's a lot of that. That's not an often talked about subject in business. But I
Right.
think, you know, we had talked about from the standpoint of, if you've got a coworker, or possibly a boss, or maybe a direct report, or anybody else in the organization, you know that they've gone through a grieving event of some kind, and it can be a sticky situation because you don't necessarily maybe you don't have a relationship with them where they would necessarily welcome talking about it a lot. But there are a number of things that you can do. And I know, Nancy, you and I talked about this beforehand. I mean, it could be something as simple as saying, hey, let me go run and get your lunch today,
Mhm.
or just those simple kinds of acts of service.
Right, right. And or asking them, do you want to talk about it, or do you want to do you not want to talk about it, but do you want me to just sit with you for a little while? And acknowledging that there's been a loss. It's so many people, if it's especially if it's the death of a loved one, don't want to bring it up because they're afraid they're going to make you feel bad. And I think we can all agree that I'm you're not going to make me feel bad by talking about Leah, because I think about her every day, and I actually welcome hearing her name, knowing that someone is remembering her. So that's not going to um, make me feel bad if you bring up my loved one's name, and that's probably true of most people. And it's okay to ask the question. We don't, before we have experienced a grief like that, and one of the big griefs, we don't know. I know before Leah died, I was always very hesitant to talk to anyone who had experienced that kind of a loss, because I didn't know what to say, and it's okay to not know what to say.
And I think there's the larger question also, is, if I see somebody wearing what I believe to be one of the disguises of grief, or that might potentially be, and it could be that, one example that comes to mind is somebody who just stays busy all the time, and somebody who always works long hours, and they're always talking about how busy they are. They're always on their phone, always on their computer, and they might be highly productive. They might be a valuable member of the team. But, and Nancy, I don't know about you, but I think I've seen a couple of patterns like that sometimes, where it becomes apparent after a while that somebody's hiding from something.
Hmm.
And sometimes, and busyness is a really easy way. And I know
Yes.
the classic example would be working late hours to avoid life at home for a
Hmm.
variety of different reasons. But
Yeah.
I was just going to say, the question it raises for me is, when I recognize that, when I can bring that level of awareness and I see what's going on, then it becomes just a question of, is there anything I can offer to somebody without even necessarily knowing what they are dealing with or have dealt with. But
Mm.
I mean, it brings to mind the question for me, could there be value in just creating a general habit of doing things for people, not necessarily in reaction to something that's going on, but just
Hmm.
to make just basically
Like
random
the,
acts of
like
kindness
the, yeah,
as
I
a
was gonna
regular
say
habit.
random acts of kindness, or being present to them. I think I probably shared this with you, but I think it's worth repeating. When I was a project manager on a job site, we would have subcontractor and owner meetings every week, and they were very contentious meetings, and there was always people fighting, and there was all kinds of stuff going on, and I would try to mitigate the solutions, find solutions. I would talk to the superintendents ahead of time and the subcontractors, and I was expending a lot of energy without much result until the day that I went to the meeting and I was present. That's all I did. I was present to each and every person as they spoke. And one of the superintendents told me before the meeting that he was going to rip this guy a new one because blah, 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 blah. And he was starting to get all blustery about it. So I was present to him. If a question came in for me to ask, I asked it. I was present to this subcontractor when he was responding. And again, if I had a question, I asked it. I didn't do anything other than that. There were no fights, and more got resolved in that meeting than any other meeting until then. And everybody is looking around saying, wow, that was a really great meeting. What happened? And someone asked me what I did, and I said, I didn't do anything, which technically was true.
Well, because they always want to fixate on what you did,
right?
Because it's always about doing something, right?
Exactly, exactly. And so from that day on, I was present at every meeting, and they weren't always as profound as that one. I think that one was a really good teaching moment for me. But being present to someone is a real gift to them, because you're seeing them as they are now, rather than the way you think they're going to be, or based upon what an interaction in the past. And when you're present to someone, it opens up the possibility to meet them where they are right now. And the other person has a different experience as well, because you're not jumping to a conclusion of how you think they're going to react. So being present to someone can be a very powerful, simple thing.
And I think maybe that's the key takeaway today, is that, I mean, sometimes being present is it's so simple that it sounds like the answer must be more complicated than that to
Right.
a lot of people. And
right.
But I think if I just reflect on for a moment how difficult it can be at times to be fully present and only be thinking about the thing I'm doing right now. And
right.
So I think the real question is, how do I, and how can we all support each other in leaving the preoccupations aside, leaving the past in the past, and just and be present during the present. And if we think about what could be possible for a workplace culture if being present was the norm. And and I think most business meetings, it's a pretty rare thing, although hopefully it'll become more common to be, maybe what would happen if at a workplace it became a standard practice that at the beginning of a meeting we're going to stop and be silent for a minute just to give everybody time to get present before we start the meeting.
Right.
And I just wonder how much would that practice alone, how many business problems could get worked out just by people doing that and nothing else.
Yeah, I'd love to see that. I think that would be kind of a radical thing to introduce to companies. So I've got one more question for you, Dave, before we wrap up and open it up to the floor. How do you see the money side of it related to all of this?
So the way I look at money, and it also relates to the business model, because every financial transaction has two sides to it. You're giving a service or a product, and you're receiving money in exchange for it, presumably of roughly equal value. And I think what can happen a lot of times in businesses where there's a culture of burnout, or there's hyper competitiveness, what's typically happened is the market has shifted and the business didn't adapt with the market. And when you have a business that's trying to play by the old rules and has not realigned itself to the demand in the marketplace, the first symptom you start to see is financial problems. You start to see cash flow getting tight. You see sales dropping off. You see cost of goods increasing. And there's all this pressure on everybody to cut costs everywhere they can. And that includes putting pressure on salaried employees to work longer hours for no additional pay. And an organization can get pretty far by just putting a lot of pressure on everybody in that way. and until there comes sometimes a breaking point where the organization simply can't hold up under all that pressure. It seems like for larger organizations, it seems like they have a higher tolerance for that than smaller ones do, just because cash reserves don't hold out as long in a small company. But I look at that, all of this relates to grief and burnout, in the sense that when an organization's leadership doesn't align itself to the market, you essentially create a toxic work environment. Maybe not that day, but slowly but surely you create a situation where you're trying to fix a problem by going at it the wrong way. And I think really one of the takeaways here from a financial standpoint is, if you focus on getting clear about the money, and this is going to probably rub some people the wrong way, but I think that I'm an advocate of being transparent about the money. And that includes sharing the financial statements of the organization with your employees and your stakeholders, and saying, hey, here's where we are. Here's what we need to move the needle. And let's have an honest and frank conversation about that. And that also means not necessarily, in a lot of organizations, if you've got one person being paid a lot more than everyone else, and it's not a fair pay structure, that's going to create burn. And so I think like I said in the beginning, you can't always fix every situation, but I think financial transparency and focusing on getting clear about the numbers can go very far in terms of getting to the root of what's actually causing a lot of the burnout, in addition to, being there for your people in other ways.
And as you were speaking, it occurred to me that if there's transparency with the money side of it, that can begin to build trust, so that maybe you can open up discussion to some of the deeper issues.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's possibly the even bigger impact of being transparent about the money, is that it creates trust.
Right.
So
Yeah.
that's because I know a lot of companies I've worked in, it was kind of, if you're not in the C-suite, the money is none of your business, was kind of the mentality. So
Right.
yeah.
Exactly. Is that a good place to open it up for questions?
I think, yeah, let's open up for questions.
Yeah. Amy or Dan, do you have a question or comment?
I do, but I'm trying to figure out how to formulate into a question, because I have a comment, but I'm like, no, I need to be in a question. Hold on a second. Here we go. Excuse me. So could you, from what I'm hearing with what Dave was just saying about how companies that are closing doors, they did not evolve with the market. Could you say that could be a side effect of the company not being present to the world around them?
I think that's a good way to look at it. I mean, I think you could say there's presence on an individual level, like I'm present in this room right now, and then you can look at presence on a collective level. I think that could actually be a really interesting way to look at that, because the company as a whole, I mean, if you have a culture of non-presence, if you have a culture where, people are in meetings, doing this on their phones the whole time, or if you have a culture where people are just scatterbrained and distracted, then you could make the case that the company on the whole is not present to the needs of the market. I think that's so then conversely, if you have a culture of presence, a culture where people are aware, people are in tune with what's going on in those little moment to moment situations, I think that what naturally could arise from that is you have more insightfulness, ideas, creativity. And does the company at some point just become collectively present? And I almost wonder, do you start just having a shared insight about what direction we all need to go in order, based on where the market is? I think that could largely be intuitive, but if you have a culture of presence, that could, I think that's a really neat way to look at that.
Yeah, I agree, because if you have a culture of presence and you're allowing any like brainstorming sessions to come from a place of presence, just imagine the goal that could be found there.
Absolutely. I'm kind of wondering if financial transparency is a tool for a company to become more present
Mm.
It certainly could be a tool in the toolbox for becoming more present. I think when I look at the connection between financial transparency and presence, which admittedly is the first time I'm ever thinking about that today, but when I connect those two, I think there's a level of presence that you need to get clear about your numbers. And I think of a couple of counter examples that maybe bring this one home is if you're looking at your bookkeeping system and it doesn't tell you what you need, a lot of times people will just get overwhelmed, they'll get confused, they'll get frustrated, and they'll just emotionally shut down. And to really get that clarity about their numbers, I think people have to realize you may be in for a bit of work here to figure this out, because it's always more work than people think it's going to be. So I think one of the things where presence comes in there is you can actually learn how to enjoy the process of getting clear about your numbers. And I think it might be that if you're expecting to find something dreadful, or if you're expecting it to just be awful, then your tendency is going to be to just avoid it. So I think you could look at any other task that same way. And it looks like Dan's got his hand up.
Yes.
Yeah, I think you make a great point about presence, because knowing your numbers is one of the things that a business relies on, of course, but I think that it is also something that is reflected in the size of the company. And in my experience, and from what Nancy was referring to, large corporate structures don't have a single experience of presence, outside of maybe the annual meeting where everybody is intent on hearing what the numbers are. But in the day-to-day operation of the business, they may be going off in their own little world and not really focused on what a corporate presence or the mission statement, what drives that business. So I think there's levels of magnitude, and addressing that is, I think, is an even bigger problem.
Yeah, and what came to mind is in a corporate culture, a lot of times the from higher up, you're told what your corporate persona should be. You're told how the corporation wants others to perceive you, so you have to put on this mask or this false persona to meet the perceptions of your bosses.
Yeah, I have my khaki pants and my nice blue shirt, or white uniform shirt, and that's the stamp of approval on the assembly line. But the mindset of each of the individuals needs to be tuned to being present. And if that occurs individually, I think that's great. And I think for entrepreneurs, that is a statement and a focus for the way you do business. But I think on medium and large scale companies, that dial needs to be recalibrated on occasion.
Well, and when you talk about something like an annual meeting, or even to whether there's an expectation the numbers are going to come out, or the plan's going to be announced, I think that the tricky part about trying to create, I think for an individual, you can be present anywhere. But now that I'm thinking about this concept of collective presence, you know, it really, one of the obstacles that I'm seeing is that if there's these cultural expectations for certain things that are supposed to happen in a meeting, or certain things that are supposed to happen at certain times of the day, you kind of have this trained response in people where there's a level of pretentiousness, and there's maybe pretending to because you're focusing on, you want to look smart, you want to look like you're productive, and you can be present and realize that that's what you have to do to survive in that environment. But to really take it to the next level, how do you really create that culture of honesty where, you know, and unfortunately there's just not room for that in a lot of organizations. But I think so. I think it comes back to that idea of awareness, you know, presence and awareness, and being able to look honestly at my surroundings and say, what's really going on here, and what can I do with this?
Yeah. Yeah. Any other questions?
Well, just to finish on that, you know, it's like personal integrity over the corporate integrity, and hopefully those two are in sync. But my experience is that they're not always, and how to shift the awareness of the corporation to embrace, you know, a mindfulness or thoughtfulness on a day-to-day basis. And, you know, in an ideal world, that's that would be my preference. But good luck with that.
Amy, did you have a comment?
I had one more question. I think when you guys were talking, I realized that a lot of times in workplaces, especially in a toxic workplace, there's the loss of respect. And I feel like that's a special kind of grief that happens. And see it happening on two different fronts, whether you lose that expectation that one day you would be perceived as, perceived as being respected to the level that you wish to be respected. There's the loss of that dream, but then there's also the loss of respect for others that you once had respect for. And so I think that my question is, does it make a difference when you are able to identify that you're feeling grief over the loss of respect? And is there a special process you have to go through for that kind of grief versus other kinds of grief you may find in the workplace?
It's the same process of feeling the feelings that arise, and recognizing that it's okay to feel grief about the loss of respect, because that is a real loss. Whether someone has lost respect for you or you've lost respect for someone else, it's a lot of times we just think, well, we can just not think about it and it'll go away, and it doesn't really go away. It just lurks underground, and it's that low level stress that we live in. So the process is the same for other grief. The feelings may be different, but the process is the same.
But yeah, I think it's a really good insight when you put it that way, that there's a loss of respect in two directions, and in either case. So I actually think there could be two separate things you're grieving at the same time, if there's a mutual loss of respect, or possibly two separate losses of respect. It all depends on the situation. But I think the key there is, it goes back to awareness. I think it's valuable just to be able to realize that that's what I'm grieving over.
Right.
And I think a lot of times we don't stop to think about what's actually going through us. And we just think, okay, I might put on one of the disguises for so long that I forget it's a disguise, and I think it's real. I think, oh, I'm just busy. I'm just stressed out. I got too much work. Yeah. But really, there's a loss of respect that I haven't grieved the loss of. And that was a really good insight.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Well, I guess, are we ready about start wrapping things up, Nancy?
Yeah, we are.
Okay.
We thank you both for being here, and for if you're watching this on the replay, thank you for joining us there. We want to offer you the opportunity to have an individual consultation with each of us individually. And we will, if you want to schedule a call with one of us to talk about what that might look like, you can do that. And David, anything to add there?
Yeah, I think really what I think we can really look at with somebody is, I focus much more on the strategic, logistical, and financial strategy side of the conversation. So if somebody wants to look at how do we systematize a business model and put practices in place that can be measured, that's definitely my jam. And I think Nancy, you can speak for yourself, but I think the way I see, you bring to the table a lot of really insightful and well thought out practices for becoming aware of emotion at many different levels. And I think that for an organization that is just dealing with anything like what we described today, I think that there's a lot we can both offer to them from a couple of different vantage points.
Yeah, yes, I would love to talk to anyone in a corporate setting who would like to put in place some resources for their employees to help them navigate the difficult times. Or if you are an employee wanting to learn how to set boundaries so that you can still feel your feelings and be a productive employee, I can help you there as well. So you can, I was just going to say, you can reach me at my website at beingwithgrief.com or on Facebook, Being with Grief. And
you can find me at my website is dave-baldwin.com, and don't forget the hyphen.
And when I send out the recording to everyone, I will put that information in the email, as well as a little bit more about what we're both offering. So with that, we will say thank you to everyone, and we will see you next time.
Till next time.